I stared at the 7 figures printed on the cashier's check, the number $3 million so crisp it felt like a dream. The satisfying slam of the bank teller's stamp was punctuated by the memory of my stepmom's face, contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. But to understand how I got this check, and how the woman who raised me after my mom died ended up screaming on her own front lawn, we have to go back to the beginning. 3 months ago, my life was a carefully constructed blueprint. By day, I was a junior architectural designer, a job that was more about agonizing over plumbing schematics and zoning codes than it was about glamorous designs. My desk was a chaotic landscape of trace paper, half-empty coffee mugs, and scale rulers. I'd spend 12-hour days submerged in the blue glow of my monitor, meticulously adjusting the rise of a staircase by a 1/4 inch or ensuring a kitchen layout maximized natural light. I loved the precision, the feeling of creating a space that would one day hold a family's memories. That night, I was working late on the Harrison project, a custom home for a family with 2 young kids. I'd spent a week just on the design of their playroom, creating built-in reading nooks and a small loft area I knew they would adore. It was my passion, pouring my heart into creating homes for other people, all while I lived in the one my father had left me. The house was my sanctuary. It was a sprawling, slightly too big for me 1960s ranch, the one I grew up in. Every scuff on the hardwood floors, every faded pencil mark on the kitchen door frame measuring my height was a part of my story. My dad had passed away 2 years prior, and in his will, he'd let his second wife, my stepmom Brenda, continue living there with me. It was his dying wish that we take care of each other. I'd taken that to heart, paying for the utilities and groceries out of my modest salary, trying to keep the peace and honor his memory. I was saving every penny I could, dreaming of a future renovation, of updating the kitchen where my own mom taught me to bake, of turning my dad's old study into a proper home office. My phone buzzed, dragging me out of a deep focus on the Harrison's roof pitch. The screen flashed. "Brenda!" I sighed, silencing the phone. A minute later, it buzzed again. I knew she'd keep calling until I picked up. "Hey, Brenda, I'm still at the office," I said, my voice tight with exhaustion. "Oh, Chloe, honey, still playing with your little building blocks?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she reserved for when she was about to ask for something or deliver a backhanded compliment. "I just worry about you, working so hard for that little job. You're going to get wrinkles." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "It's my career, Brenda, not a game." "Of course, dear, of course. I just think you should be out having fun, meeting a nice man. A big old house like this is so empty with just you cooped up in your room all the time." There it was, the subtle, persistent jab about the house. It had become her favorite topic. "I'm not cooped up, I'm working, and I like the house," I said, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. "It's home." "Well, I was just thinking," she continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Your father, bless his heart, would have wanted you to have a life, not to be tied down to this old money pit. All this upkeep, the property taxes, it's a tremendous burden for a single girl." I could hear the fake concern dripping from every word. Brenda had never lifted a finger for the upkeep. She treated the house like a hotel where she was the permanent guest of honor. I was the one who called the plumber when the sink leaked, who spent a whole weekend restaining the back deck, who managed the budget. "I can handle it, Brenda. It's fine," I said, trying to end the conversation. "Listen, I really have to get back to this. I have a deadline." "Always busy," she sighed, a theatrical wave of martyrdom in her voice. "All right, honey. Don't work too late. I left you some of my tuna casserole in the fridge. You need to eat something proper." I hung up the phone, a familiar knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Her tuna casserole was a soggy, mayonnaise-laden monstrosity I hadn't touched since I was 12. It wasn't an act of kindness. It was a performance. Everything with Brenda was. Her feigned concern, her subtle digs at my career, her constant hints about the house being a burden. It was all part of a slow, calculated campaign. I just didn't realize how far she was willing to take it. I turned back to my screen, trying to lose myself in the clean, logical lines of the blueprint, but a cold unease had settled over me. She was up to something. I could feel it. That cold unease festered for 2 weeks. I tried to bury it under blueprints and late nights, but it was a splinter under the skin. Brenda, for her part, was a model of domestic bliss. She hummed in the kitchen, left me her dreadful casseroles, and asked about my day with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The performance was so complete, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the malice in her voice, that I was just stressed from work. I let my guard down. That was my first mistake. I came home on a Thursday, my arms full of grocery bags, already mentally planning the chicken pot pie I was going to make from scratch. As I pushed the front door open with my hip, the scene in the living room stopped me cold. The groceries slipped from my grasp, oranges and a carton of eggs tumbling across the hardwood floor I'd polished just last weekend. Brenda was sitting on the sofa, legs crossed, sipping a glass of iced tea. Next to her sat a man in a slick, silver suit, a leather portfolio open on his lap. But it wasn't him that made my blood run cold. It was the bright red sign planted in the middle of our front lawn, visible through the picture window. A sign I'd seen 1,000 times in other neighborhoods, but never imagined I'd see here. It had 3 bold white words on it, "For sale." "Brenda?" My voice was a choked whisper. What is that? Who is this?" Brenda looked up, her expression one of pleasant surprise, as if I'd just walked in on my own surprise party. "Chloe, honey, you're home. This is Mr. Abernathy. He's from Sterling Realty. I have the most wonderful news." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What news? What is that sign doing on my lawn?" "Our lawn, dear," she corrected, her voice still syrupy sweet. "And it's the solution to all our problems. I've sold the house." The world tilted. The smell of the cracked eggs on the floor felt nauseating. "You what? You can't. This is my house. Dad left it to me." Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. Brenda waved a dismissive hand at him. "It's all right, Richard. She's just a little emotional." She turned back to me, and for the first time, the mask of concern dropped away completely, replaced by a look of cold, hard triumph. "Your father's will, bless his sentimental heart, was a little vague. It said you get the house, yes, but it also said I have the right to live here for the rest of my life. My lawyer calls it a life estate, a very powerful position to be in." My mind was spinning, trying to catch up. "What are you talking about? A lawyer?" "Of course, a lawyer," she said, as if I were a simple-minded child. "I petitioned the court. I explained that the house had become, as we've discussed, a tremendous burden. All the upkeep, the taxes." She was using my own words, the ones she had fed me, as a weapon against me. The judge agreed that forcing a sale was the only equitable solution. "It frees you from this money pit and ensures I'm financially secure, just as your father would have wanted." I stared at her, the sheer, calculated cruelty of it sucking the air from my lungs. She had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every complaint, every feigned concern was a piece of her strategy. "So you're just kicking me out of my own home?" "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "We're both leaving, and we're both getting a lovely payout. The buyers offered $3 million, all cash, and they want to close in 2 weeks. $3 million. The number was so huge it felt fake. For a wild second, a sliver of relief cut through the panic. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Okay, so we split it?" Brenda let out a small, tinkling laugh. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. "Oh, honey, that's not how a life estate works. The value is split based on my life expectancy. Actuarial tables, you know. My share comes to 90%. The other 10% is yours." The room went silent. The math clicked into place with sickening finality. $300,000 for me, $2.7 million for her. My entire inheritance, my childhood home, the place where every memory of my parents lived, was being sold, and she was taking almost all of it. My whole world was collapsing, and if you've ever felt that kind of free fall, you know exactly what I mean. If this is your first time here, by the way, you should probably subscribe, because you won't believe how this ends. Tears streamed down my face. No, you can't. This isn't about money. This was Mom and Dad's house. I grew up here. Brenda stood up, smoothing down her dress. Her face was a stone mask of indifference. It's just a house, Chloe. You're too sentimental. Your father spoiled you, and frankly, you're not equipped to handle an asset like this. You're just a little girl who plays with building blocks all day. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You don't deserve it. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, stepping right over the broken eggs without a glance. Now, she said brightly to Mr. Abernathy, who was trying to become invisible in his chair, let me get you a refill. Then you can tell me again about how quickly that escrow is going to close. I stood frozen, the sticky sweet smell of oranges and the faint, sulfuric scent of broken eggs filling the air. Mr. Abernathy was staring at a spot on the wall, his face a perfect picture of a man wishing he could dematerialize. Brenda breezed back into the living room, a freshly beaded glass of iced tea in her hand, which she passed to the realtor. She navigated around the puddle of yolk and shattered shell on the floor as if it were an intentional, albeit ugly, centerpiece. My feet finally unstuck from the floor. I followed her, my voice barely a whisper. Brenda, please. She turned, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised. Please what, Chloe? Please clean up your mess? Please don't do this, I begged, my hands twisting together. I tried to anchor myself, to find the logical, reasonable architect inside me who could solve this problem. Dad wanted us to take care of each other. He wouldn't have wanted this. He loved this house. He loved me in this house. I was appealing to a memory, to a sense of loyalty I suddenly realized she had never possessed. Your father wanted me to be secure, she said coolly, taking a delicate sip from her own glass. And this, she gestured vaguely around the room, is my security. A very handsome one at that. But 90%? The words felt like sand in my mouth. That can't be right. There has to be a mistake. We can talk to a lawyer. My lawyer. We can get a different appraisal. Maybe I can buy you out. I can take out a loan. I can pay you for the value of your life estate. We don't have to sell. I was grasping at straws, laying out options like they were schematic drawings, hoping one of them would click into place and make sense. Brenda stared at me for a long moment. Then she let out that same horrible, tinkling laugh from before. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and it cut right through me. Oh, honey, she said, shaking her head with mock pity. That is just the most precious thing I've ever heard. She leaned against the door frame, the picture of casual victory. Buy me out? With what money? The pennies you make playing with your little building blocks? You can't even afford the property taxes without my help. It was a blatant lie. I paid for everything, but it was said with such authority that for a split second I almost believed it. And your own lawyer? She scoffed. Go ahead, find one. By the time you've scraped together a retainer, the sale will be closed and the money will be in an account so far away your head will spin. I already did this the smart way, Chloe. I did it the legal way. The judge signed off on everything. It's done. She set her glass down on the hall table with a click. You're so much like your mother, she said, and the sudden mention of my mom was like a slap. All heart, no head. You think the world is supposed to be fair. You think people are supposed to be good. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to that venomous, conspiratorial whisper. But the world isn't fair, Chloe, and I am very, very good at getting what I deserve. She smiled, a tight, reptilian thing, then turned to Mr. Abernathy. Richard, let's leave her to it. We can finalize the last few details at my club. She walked out the front door without a backward glance, leaving him to scurry after her. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence. I sank to my knees. The sharp tang of the raw egg was overwhelming. My gaze fell on the mess. A carton's worth of potential. of nourishment, of future meals, now just a gooey, useless puddle on the floor my father had laid. It was my life, spilled and broken in an instant. "It's just a house, Chloe," her words echoed in my head. "You're too sentimental." Was I? Was it sentimental to cherish the pencil marks on the doorframe charting my growth? To love the worn spot on the arm of my dad's favorite chair? To feel my mother's presence in the kitchen, her laughter bouncing off the old linoleum? This house wasn't an asset, it was a vessel. It held every part of me, every memory of them. And Brenda had just put a price tag on it, sold it, and told me my entire life was worth a mere 10%. I crawled over to the window, my knees sticking to the floorboards. Outside, the red sign screamed its victory. "For sale." It felt like an epitaph. My home, my sanctuary, my past. All sold to the highest bidder by the woman my father trusted to take care of me. He had made a blueprint for my life, one where I was safe and cared for in the home he built. But he'd made a fatal error in his design. He hadn't accounted for Brenda. He hadn't seen the rot in the foundation. She was right. I was a little girl who played with building blocks. I designed perfect, orderly spaces where families could be safe and happy. I believed in clean lines, sound structures, and plans that everyone agreed on. I had no idea how to operate in this other world, the one of loopholes and lies, of back-alley deals and smiling cruelty. I was an architect without a blueprint, and my entire world was facing demolition. For a long time, I just knelt there, the cold of the hardwood seeping through my jeans. The silence in the house was a physical weight. It was the silence of a tomb, a place where life used to be. My gaze drifted from the congealing mess of eggs to the red sign on the lawn, a glaring wound in the landscape of my life. Brenda's parting words echoed, a cruel mantra designed to break me. "You're too sentimental. You don't deserve it. A little girl who plays with building blocks." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, cold fracture. A little girl who plays with building blocks. She meant it as an insult, a way to diminish me and my entire career. But what did I do all day? I read contracts. I navigated labyrinthine zoning codes. I scrutinized blueprints for a single, misplaced line that could compromise an entire structure. My job wasn't playing. It was about finding the flaws, understanding the rules, and ensuring the foundation was sound before you even thought about the paint color. Brenda had built a case, brick by legal brick, to tear my life down. She thought her structure was flawless. But I knew, better than anyone, that every structure has a weakness. You just have to find the blueprint. My father was a meticulous man, an engineer by trade. He believed in systems, in order, in fail-safes. It was from him I'd inherited my love of precision. He wouldn't have left me vulnerable. He wouldn't have built a home for me only to leave the door unlocked for a wolf. The will Brenda had quoted, the one giving her a life estate, felt too simple, too vague for my dad. A new energy, sharp and cold, propelled me to my feet. I ignored the mess on the floor and walked down the hall to my dad's old study. I'd kept it exactly as he'd left it, a shrine of leather-bound books, neatly organized files, and the faint, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. Brenda never came in here. She called it drab and cluttered with old junk. To me, it was the heart of the house, the control room. I started with his filing cabinet. The drawer slid open with a heavy, satisfying groan. Wills, insurance policies, old tax returns. I pulled out every folder related to his estate. I found the will Brenda had mentioned. It was there, just as she'd said, the house to me, with the provision that Brenda could live here for her lifetime. My heart sank. It felt so final. But my father was a man of redundancies. He had backups for his backups. My eyes scanned the shelves, landing on a row of identical dark blue binders. They were his project files from his engineering firm, but one was slightly different. It wasn't labeled with a project number, but with our family name, Miller Family Revocable Living Trust. My breath caught. A trust that was different from a will, more complex, more powerful. My fingers trembled as I pulled the heavy binder from the shelf, a fine layer of dust puffing into the air. I sat at his desk, the worn leather of his chair cool against my skin, and opened it. The first 50 pages were dense legalese, a forest of jargon that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But I wasn't most people. I was an architect. I was trained to read the fine print. I scanned section after section, my eyes hunting for keywords: property, beneficiary, residency, sale. And then I found it. Article 4, Section 3B, Disposition of Real Property. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I read the paragraph once, then twice, then a third time, letting the beautiful, precise, glorious words sink in. Upon the grantor's death, the real property located at 412 Chestnut Lane shall not pass through the will, but shall be administered directly by the terms of this trust. The property and its title are to be transferred in their entirety to the sole successor beneficiary, Chloe Ann Miller. Any other individual residing at the property at the time of the grantor's death, including the grantor's spouse, Brenda Miller, shall be considered a tenant at will. Said tenancy may be continued or terminated at the sole discretion of the beneficiary, Chloe Ann Miller, with 30 days written notice. My world stopped tilting. It snapped back into perfect, solid alignment. The will was a smokescreen. The house wasn't part of the probate estate. It was an asset of the trust. Brenda didn't have a life estate. She had a tenancy that I could terminate with a month's notice. But there was more. A few paragraphs down, under a section titled Protection of Trust Assets, was the final, beautiful nail in her coffin. No asset held within this trust may be petitioned for partition sale, liquidated, or otherwise sold by any party other than the named beneficiary. Any such attempt shall be considered a breach of the fiduciary duty owed to the trust and may result in the immediate termination of any and all provisions granted to that party elsewhere in this document. She hadn't just overstepped, she had voided her own position. Her petition to the court, the one the judge had apparently approved, was based on a lie. She had misrepresented her legal standing to force the sale of an asset she had no right to touch. I closed the binder, the sound a quiet, definitive thud in the silent room. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of an architect who had just found the fatal structural flaw in her rival's design. Brenda thought she was a master strategist. She'd gloated about her lawyers, her court orders, her actuarial tables. She had built her entire plan on a foundation of sand. She called me a little girl who played with building blocks. She had no idea I was about to use them to build her a cage. The binder felt heavy in my hands, a solid, 3-pound anchor of truth in a world that had been capsized. Brenda's words, little girl, building blocks, you don't deserve it, still echoed in the study, but they no longer stung. They were fuel. An architect doesn't get emotional when they find a flaw in a rival's design. They get to work. And I had just found a fault line big enough to swallow Brenda whole. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, my voice a convincing imitation of defeated and unwell. My first step was finding a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark. I spent 2 hours in a coffee shop across town, cross-referencing reviews for the most ruthless estate litigators in the city. I found her in a high-rise downtown, Eleanor Albright, a woman whose professional headshot looked like she ate men like Mr. Abernathy for breakfast. I sat in her sleek, minimalist office, the blue binder open on the conference table between us. She was a hawk in a gray suit, her sharp eyes scanning the pages of the trust document with an intensity that made me feel like I'd finally found an ally. She read for 10 minutes in complete silence, her only movement a single, slow tap of a pen against her legal pad. Finally, she looked up at me, a thin, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Ms. Miller," she said, her voice like gravel and silk, "this isn't just a legal document. This is a masterpiece. Your father built you a fortress." "So I'm right?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "She can't do this?" "Oh, she can do it," Ms. Albright corrected, leaning forward. "And we are going to let her. She has committed multiple acts of fraud, misrepresenting her legal standing to a court of law, misrepresenting herself as the title holder to a realty company, attempting to liquidate an asset she has no claim to. It's breathtakingly audacious and incredibly stupid." The plan she laid out was simple, elegant, and utterly vicious. It was a masterclass in malicious compliance. We wouldn't stop the sale. We wouldn't file an injunction. We would let Brenda march toward her victory, blissfully unaware that she was walking a plank of her own making. Ms. Albright would contact the escrow company, presenting them with the trust document that proved I was the sole title holder and beneficiary. She would serve them with new disbursement instructions, legally obligating them to wire 100% of the proceeds, all $3 million, into a new trust account set up in my name only. "The key," Ms. Albright said, her eyes glinting, "is for you to play your part. You are defeated. You are heartbroken. You are packing your bags and accepting your miserable 10%. You do not give her any reason to suspect the ground has shifted beneath her feet." I went home and became an actress. I started in the living room buying boxes and packing tape. I let my shoulders slump. I let my eyes look puffy and red. I moved through the house like a ghost, a study in quiet despair. When Brenda saw me, she'd offer a pitying sigh. "Oh, Chloe, don't look so glum. Think of it as a fresh start," she'd say, watching me wrap my mother's porcelain teacups in newspaper. "I'm trying," I'd mumble, not meeting her gaze. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calculated misery. I packed my father's books, my childhood drawings, the entire contents of my life. Each packed box was a prop in my play. Brenda, meanwhile, was ecstatic. She bought a new convertible, a garish shade of pearl white, and spent her afternoons at the country club, bragging to her friends about her windfall and her imminent move to a luxury condo downtown. The night before the closing, the house was an echo chamber of cardboard boxes. I was in the living room, taping up the last box of photo albums, when Brenda sauntered in. She held a flute of champagne, her face glowing with triumph. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass in a mock toast. She took a theatrical look around at the stacks of boxes. "I have to admit, I'm proud of you, Chloe. I didn't think you had it in you to be so practical. Accepting your situation, moving on, is very mature." I kept my eyes on the box in front of me, pressing the tape down with methodical precision. She took a sip of champagne and let out a little laugh. "I know you think I'm a monster, but one day you'll thank me. I freed you from this dusty old mausoleum. You were never going to amount to anything. Rattling around in here with your sad little memories and your building block fantasies. Now you have $300,000. You can go get a nice little apartment somewhere. You'll be fine." She leaned against the door frame, the very picture of condescending victory, waiting for my tears, for a final, futile plea. I finished taping the box, running my hand over the smooth surface. I pushed it flush against the others, creating a neat, solid wall, a perfect structure. Then, slowly, I looked up at her. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. My smile was small, a private little thing, but it was enough to make her champagne flute pause halfway to her lips. Confusion flickered across her face. It was the first genuine expression I'd seen from her in months. It wouldn't be the last. I said nothing, just stood up and walked to my room, leaving her alone with her victory champagne and the first tiny crack in her perfect facade. The next day, we met at the escrow office. It was a sterile beige room on the 12th floor of a glass tower downtown, smelling faintly of toner and air freshener. Brenda was dressed for a coronation in a cream-colored pantsuit, her new convertible's key fob, placed conspicuously on the table. I was in jeans and a simple gray sweater, the uniform of the vanquished. I played my part to perfection, keeping my eyes downcast, my answers to the escrow officer's questions monosyllabic. Brenda was practically vibrating with glee. She patronizingly patted my hand as we sat down. "It'll all be over soon, honey. Then we can both move on." The escrow officer, a harried-looking woman named Patty, slid a mountain of documents across the polished table. "All right, if you'll both just sign on the highlighted lines. This finalizes the sale and authorizes the disbursement of funds." My heart hammered a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The point of no return. I picked up the pen, my hand perfectly steady. I signed my name, Chloe Ann Miller, on a dozen different pages. My signature was clean, decisive, the signature of a woman taking back her life. Brenda signed with a flourish, her penmanship a series of extravagant, self-important loops. She pushed the last document back to Patty with a triumphant smile. "There, all done. Now, when can we expect the wire transfers to go through?" "The funds are released from the buyer's account immediately upon signing," Patty said, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "I'll just initiate the transfer now. It should reflect in your respective accounts within a few minutes." She turned to her computer and clicked a few times. "Okay, the disbursement has been executed." Brenda's eyes were glued to her phone, her thumb refreshing her mobile banking app. The smug smile was cemented on her face, waiting for the 7-figure notification that would validate her entire scheme. 1 minute passed, then 2. The smile began to twitch. "Is there a delay sometimes?" she asked, her voice a little tight. "It can take a moment depending on the bank," Patty said without looking up from her filing. Another minute of suffocating silence. I watched a bead of sweat trace a path down Brenda's temple. She was furiously tapping her screen now. Nothing. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her syrupy sweetness evaporating. "Are you sure you did it right? I should have received a notification for $2.7 million by now." Patty finally looked up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She clicked her mouse a few times, reviewing the transaction. "The transfer was successful, ma'am. $3 million wired as instructed." Brenda's head shot up. $3 million? To who? It's supposed to be split." Patty frowned, tapping the screen to pull up the disbursement order. "I have the instructions right here. They were updated last Tuesday by Ms. Albright's office. 100% of the proceeds, a single payment of $3 million, wired to the Miller Family Trust account." She looked from her screen to me, per the instructions of the sole title holder and beneficiary, Chloe Miller. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a universe imploding. Brenda slowly turned her head, her face a mask of utter disbelief. "What did she just say?" she whispered, looking at me as if for the first time. I finally met her gaze. The slumped shoulders, the downcast eyes, the defeated girl, all of it fell away. I sat up straight, my hands resting calmly on the table. She said, I began, my voice as cold and clear as glass, that the money was transferred to the legal owner of the house, me. "No," Brenda breathed, shaking her head. "The will, the life estate, the judge." "The will was irrelevant," I said, cutting her off. "Dad was smarter than that. He was an engineer. He built in a failsafe. It's called a revocable living trust. He put the house in it years before he even met you." I leaned forward, savoring every word. "You didn't have a life estate, Brenda. You were a tenant whose residency continued at my sole discretion." The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty gray canvas. "And the best part," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, echoing the venom she had used on me, "is the little clause Dad included to protect his assets. Any attempt by a non-beneficiary to force a sale of the property constitutes a breach. It immediately terminates any and all provisions granted to you. By petitioning the court, by lying about your legal standing, by trying to steal my home, you voided your own tenancy. You evicted yourself." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The numbers were churning behind her eyes, the horrifying math finally clicking into place. Not only was the $2.7 million gone, but so was her right to live in the house. So was her entire future. "No," she croaked, the word tearing from her throat. "No, you're lying, you little bitch." She lunged across the table, her perfectly manicured nails aiming for my face. Patty shrieked and scrambled back as Brenda swiped at me, her face contorted into the mask of pure, unadulterated rage I would never forget. She was a cornered animal, all pretense of sophistication gone, replaced by raw, screeching fury. "You think you can steal from me?" she screamed as security guards burst into the room. "That money is mine." They grabbed her arms, hauling her away from the table as she thrashed and spat. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, the architect watching the flawed structure she'd targeted collapse into dust. She had called me a little girl who played with building blocks. She was right, and I had just built her a prison. The security guards hauled Brenda from the room, her shrieks for her money echoing down the hallway, until a heavy door cut them off. The escrow officer, Patty, was pale and stammering apologies, but I barely heard her. I simply sat at the polished table, the ghost of my smile still on my lips, and looked at the stack of signed documents. They were a blueprint for my new life. Each signature was a load-bearing wall, each clause a foundation of solid rock. I walked out of that building and didn't look back. On the drive back to the house that was no longer mine, but an asset I had just successfully liquidated, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. "A wire transfer for $3 million has been received in your account." I stared at the numbers on the screen. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a cashier's check. It was real. But I didn't feel the elation I expected. I felt a cold, quiet calm, the satisfaction of a complex problem solved. I spent the rest of the day in the empty, echoing house, surrounded by the cardboard boxed remains of my past. I ordered a pizza and ate it sitting on the floor, the first meal I hadn't paid for with my modest designer's salary. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang, flashing a number I didn't recognize. I knew who it was. I let it ring 4 times before answering, putting the call on speaker. "Chloe?" Brenda's voice was a ragged, desperate rasp. The fury was gone, replaced by the hollow shell of panic. "Oh, thank God. Chloe, honey, you have to fix this." I said nothing. I just listened to the sound of her frantic breathing. "It was a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "A terrible mistake. The lawyers, the escrow people, they got it all wrong. You have to call them, Chloe. You have to tell them to release my money, please. I'm begging you." There it was. The begging. It wasn't satisfying. It was just pathetic. "There was no mistake, Brenda," I said, my voice even and low. "Yes, there was," she shrieked, a hint of the old hysteria returning. "We were supposed to split it. I'll give you more. We can do 50-50. I'll give you half, Chloe, I swear. Just call them." "The time for negotiation is over," I stated, each word a carefully placed stone. "You made your offer. 90-10. I remember it very clearly." "I didn't mean it. I was just stressed," she sobbed. "You don't understand, Chloe. That convertible, the condo, I put down deposits. I'll lose everything. They're gonna sue me." I picked at a loose thread on my jeans. "That sounds like a personal problem. What you should be worried about is my lawsuit. Ms. Albright has already drafted it. We're suing you for damages, Brenda, for the emotional distress, the legal fees, and the blatant attempt to defraud a trust. It's quite a list." Silence. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, the last vestiges of her scheme crumbling to dust. "A lawsuit?" she whispered. "A lawsuit." I confirmed. "And that's before we forward the evidence of your fraudulent court petition to the district attorney's office. You lied to a judge, Brenda. They tend to frown on that." A choked, guttural sound came through the phone. It was the sound of absolute defeat. "What do you want?" Finally, the right question. I leaned back against a stack of boxes. The power in the conversation now settled entirely on my side of the line. "I was prepared to offer you a severance package," I said coolly. $250,000, a clean break. But listening to you now, begging and making promises you have no intention of keeping, I find the idea overly generous." No, the $250,000 is fine." "It's perfect. I'll take it," she said, grabbing onto the number like a drowning woman lunging for a life raft. "My offer has been revised," I said, cutting her off. "The price of your freedom just went up. Or rather, Down. You will receive $100,000. Not a penny more. 100,000? Her voice was a squeak of outrage. That's nothing. I can't. You can, and you will, I interrupted, my voice hardening. You will take the $100,000, and in return, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement and a release of all current and future claims against me and my father's estate. You will never contact me or any member of my family ever again. If you so much as send me a Christmas card, the entire agreement is void. I let the terms hang in the air. Consider it my final offer, I said. Accept it, and maybe I won't pursue the lawsuit for damages or report your other violations. Refuse and you'll get nothing but a mountain of legal bills and the undivided attention of the DA. The choice is yours. The only sound was her ragged, shuddering breath. The woman who had called me a sentimental little girl who had tried to steal my home and my inheritance was being offered a lifeline I had every right to withhold. She was trapped in a cage of her own design, and I was the only one with the key. Fine, she choked out, the word thick with hatred and humiliation. Fine. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat in the darkness of my father's house one last time, not as a victim, but as its final, rightful owner. I had sold the building, but I had reclaimed my home. I met Brenda one last time in Ms. Albright's sterile conference room. She was a ghost in a cheap pantsuit, the vibrant colors she favored, replaced by a washed-out beige that matched her complexion. She didn't look at me as she signed the settlement papers, her extravagant signature now a shaky, brittle scrawl. I slid the cashier's check for $100,000 across the table. Her hand trembled as she took it. It was her severance package from a life she had tried to steal. There was no triumph in it for me, only a grim finality, like closing the door on a room filled with bad memories. The following day, I walked into my bank. The wire transfer had cleared, a long string of numbers sitting silently in my account. It felt abstract, unreal. I need to make a withdrawal, I told the teller. I want a cashier's check. When she asked for the amount, I took a deep breath. $2,900,000. The teller's eyes widened, but she processed the request, and that's how I ended up back where this story began, staring at the 7 figures printed on the crisp paper. The satisfying slam of the bank teller's stamp was the period at the end of a long and terrible sentence. I held the check in my hands, feeling its weight. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was the value of my childhood home, the sum of my father's foresight, the price of my freedom. It was the weapon I'd used to win a war one never wanted to fight. A few weeks later, I was at the old house on Chestnut Lane. The new owners, the Harrison family, the very same family whose playroom I had agonized over, were moving in. I'd given them my old blueprints of the house along with the keys, and they'd asked me to walk through with them one last time. As I showed Mrs. Harrison the hidden reading nook I'd designed for her kids, a car screeched to a halt at the curb. It was Brenda. She stumbled out of a dented sedan, her hair a mess, her face blotchy and ravaged. She saw me on the porch, and her face twisted into that familiar mask of rage. "You!" she shrieked, marching across the lawn. "Their lawn now. You did this to me. I have nothing." The pearl-white convertible was gone. The luxury condo of fantasy turned to ash. Her country club friends had ostracized her the moment the gossip spread. All she had left was the $100,000 I'd given her, a sum that, for a woman of her tastes, was practically an insult. She stood on the grass, screaming about her money, her life estate, her stolen future, while the Harrison children peeked out from behind their mother's legs. I just looked at her, this small, pathetic woman, and felt nothing but pity. She had burned her own world down for a pile of cash she couldn't keep. The money didn't make me happy, not at first, but it gave me something better, control. I didn't quit my job, I bought the firm. I walked into my boss's office, slid a cashier's check across his desk, a much smaller one this time, and became the owner of the company where I used to fetch coffee. Brenda had called me a little girl who played with building blocks. Now I owned the entire toy store. I renamed it Miller Design Group, in honor of my dad. We don't just build luxury homes anymore. I started a foundation arm, designing and building beautiful, functional, and affordable housing for families who need it. I pour my heart into creating sanctuaries, just like the one my father built for me. I use the precision he taught me to build walls that keep people safe, and the warmth my mother gave me to make sure that inside those walls, there is a home. Brenda thought the house was just an asset, a pile of money waiting to be claimed. She never understood that its real value was in the memories it held and the safety it provided. She saw a price tag. I saw a blueprint for a life. In the end, I sold the asset, but I kept the part that mattered. I'm still building that new life, brick by brick, every single day. It's a story I'm excited to keep telling, and if you want to see what gets built next, you should make sure you're subscribed.